To this pamphlet, which was at once discovered to be Johnson's, several answers came out, in which care was taken to remind the public of his former attacks upon government, and of his now being a pensioner, without allowing for the honorable terms upon which Johnson's pension was granted and accepted, or the change of systems which the British court had undergone upon the accession of his present majesty. He was, however, soothed in the highest strain of panegyric in a poem called The Remonstrance by the Reverend Mr. Stockdale, to whom he was upon many occasions a kind of protector. A kind protector, rather, not a kind of protector. Same thing. The following admirable minute made by him describes so well his own state and that of numbers to whom self-examination is habitual that I cannot omit it. June 1st, 1770. Every man naturally persuades himself that he can keep his resolutions, nor is he convinced of his imbecility but by length of times and frequency of experiment. This opinion of our own constancy is so prevalent that we always despise him who suffers his general and settled purpose to be overpowered by an occasional desire. They, therefore, whom frequent failures have made desperate, cease to form resolutions, and they who are become cunning do not tell them. Those who do not make them are very few, but of their effect little is perceived. For scarcely any man persists in a course of life planned by choice, but as he is restrained from deviation by some external power. He who may live as he will seldom lives long in the observation of his own rules. And that comes from Johnson's Prayers and Meditations, page 95. Of this year, that being 1770, I have obtained the following letters. To the Reverend Dr. Farmer, Cambridge. Sir, as no man ought to keep wholly to himself any possession that may be useful to the public, I hope you will not think me unreasonably intrusive if I have recourse to you for such information as you are more able to give me than any other man. In support of an opinion which you have already placed above the need of any more support, Mr. Stevens, a very ingenious gentleman, lately of King's College, has collected an account of all the translations which Shakespeare might have seen and used. He wishes his catalogue to be perfect, and therefore entreats that you will favor him by the insertion of such additions as the accuracy of your inquiries has enabled you to make. To this request I take the liberty of adding my own solicitation. We have no immediate use for this catalogue, and therefore do not desire that it should interrupt or hinder your more important employments, but it will be kind to let us know that you receive it. I am, Sir, etc. Johnson's Court, Fleet Street, Sam Johnson. March 21st, 1770. To the Reverend Mr. Thomas Warden. Dear Sir, the readiness with which you were pleased to promise me some notes on Shakespeare was a new instance of your friendship. I shall not hurry you, but am desired by Mr. Stevens, who helps me in this edition, to let you know that we shall print the tragedies first, and shall therefore want first the notes which belong to them. We think not to incommode the readers with a supplement, and therefore what we cannot put into its proper place will do us no good. We shall not begin to print before the end of 6 weeks, perhaps not so soon. I am, etc. London, June 23rd, 1770, Sam Johnson. To the Reverend Dr. Joseph Warden. Not Thomas, Joseph. Dearest Sir, I am revising my edition of Shakespeare, and remember that I formerly misrepresented your opinion of Lear. Be pleased to write the paragraph as you would have it, and send it, if you have any remarks of your own upon that or any other play, I shall gladly receive them. Make my compliments to Mrs. Warden. I sometimes think of wandering for a few days to Winchester, but am apt to delay. I am, sir, your most humble servant, September 27, 1770, Sam Johnson. I was just thinking there for a minute if Winchester is one of those words that you say in a weird way, like maybe it's supposed to be Windcheer or something. Windcheer, maybe? I don't know. It's spelled Winchester, though, so that's why I pronounce it that way. Moving right along to Mr. Francis Barber at Mrs. Clapp's, Bishop Stortford, Hertfordshire. Dear Francis, I am at last sat down to write to you, and should very much blame myself for having neglected you so long, if I did not impute that and many other failings to want of health. I hope not to be so long silent again. I am very well satisfied with your progress if you can really perform the exercises which you are set, and I hope Mr. Ellis does not suffer you to impose on him or on yourself. Make my compliments to Mr. Ellis, and to Mrs. Clapp and Mr. Smith. Let me know what English books you read for your entertainment. You can never be wise unless you love reading. Do not imagine that I shall forget or forsake you, for if, when I examine you, I find that you have not lost your time, you shall want no encouragement from yours affectionately, London, September 25th, 1770, Sam Johnson. To the same. Dear Francis, I hope you mind your business. I design you shall stay with Mrs. Clapp these holidays. If you are invited out, you may go, if Mr. Ellis gives leave. I have ordered you some clothes which you will receive, I believe, next week. My compliments to Mrs. Clapp and to Mr. Ellis and Mr. Smith, etc. I am your affectionate, December 7th, 1770, Sam Johnson. During this year, there was a total cessation of all correspondence between Dr. Johnson and me, without any coldness on either side, but merely from procrastination, continued from day to day. And as I was not in London, I had no opportunity of enjoying his company and recording his conversation. To supply this blank, I shall present my readers with some collectionnaire obligingly furnished to me by the Reverend Dr. Maxwell of Falkland in Ireland, sometime assistant preacher at the Temple, and for many years the social friend of Johnson, who spoke of him with a very kind regard. Quoting him here, I guess. My acquaintance with that great and venerable character commenced in the year 1754. I was introduced to him by Mr. Grierson, the son of the learned Mrs. Grierson, who was patronized by the late Lord Granville and was the editor of several of the classics. He was at that time His Majesty's printer in Dublin, a gentleman of uncommon learning and great wit and vivacity. Mr. Grierson died in Germany at the age of 27. Well, that's pretty young. Dr. Johnson highly respected his abilities and often observed that he possessed more extensive knowledge than any man of his years he had ever known. His industry was equal to his talents, and he particularly excelled in every species of philological learning, and was, perhaps, the best critic of the age he lived in. I must always remember with gratitude my obligation to Mr. Grierson for the honor and happiness of Dr. Johnson's acquaintance and friendship, which continued uninterrupted and undiminished to his death, a connection that was at once the pride and happiness of my life. I like this guest column part now we got. What pity it is that so much wit and good sense as he continually exhibited in conversation should perish unrecorded. Few persons quitted his company without perceiving themselves wiser and better than they were before. On serious subjects he flashed the most interesting conviction upon his auditors, and upon lighter topics you might have supposed albeno musas de monte locutus, which means, of course, They had come from the lips of the muses on the Eilbun hill, which is from Horace's Epistles. Though I can hope to add but little to the celebrity of so exalted a character, by any communications I can furnish, yet out of pure respect to his memory, I will venture to transmit to you some anecdotes concerning him which fell under my own observation. The very minutiae of such character must be interesting, and may be compared to the filings of diamonds. In politics, he was deemed a Tory, but certainly was not so in the obnoxious or party sense of the term. For while he asserted the legal and salutary prerogatives of the crown, he no less respected the constitutional liberties of the people. Whiggism, at the time of the Revolution, he said, was accompanied with certain principles, but latterly, as a mere party distinction under Walpole and the Pelhams, was no better than the politics of stock jobbers and the religion of infidels. He detested the idea of governing by parliamentary corruption, and asserted most strenuously that a prince steadily and conspicuously pursuing the interest of his people could not fail of parliamentary concurrence. A prince of ability, he contended, might and should be the directing soul and spirit of his own administration. In short, his own minister, and not the mere head of the party. And then, and not till then, would the royal dignity be sincerely respected. Johnson seemed to think that a certain degree of crown influence over the House of Parliament, not meaning a corruption and shameful dependence, was very salutary, nay, even necessary in our mixed government. For, said he, if the members were under no crown influence and disqualified from receiving any gratification from court, and resembled, as they possibly might, Pym and Hersling, and other stubborn and sturdy members of a long Parliament, the wheels of government would be totally obstructed. Such men would oppose, merely to show their power, from envy, jealousy, and perversity of disposition, and not gaining themselves would hate and oppose all who did, not loving the persons of the prince, and conceiving they owed him little gratitude, from the mere spirit of insolence and in contradiction, they would oppose and thwart him upon all occasions. I'm falling asleep here reading this, I'm afraid. Okay, here we go. The inseparable and perfection annexed to all human government consisted, he said, in not being able to create a sufficient fund of virtue and principle to carry the laws into due and effectual execution. Wisdom might plan, but virtue alone could execute. And where could sufficient virtue be found? A variety of delegated and often discretionary powers must be entrusted somewhere, which, if not governed by integrity and conscience, would necessarily be abused, till at last a constable would sell his for a shilling. This excellent person was sometimes charged with abetting slavish and arbitrary principles of government. Nothing, in my opinion, could be a grosser calumny and misrepresentation. For how can it be rationally supposed that he should adopt such pernicious and absurd opinions, though supported his philosophical character, so much dignity, was extremely jealous of his personal liberty and independence, and could not brook the smallest appearance of neglect or insult even from the highest personages? But let us view him in some instances of more familiar life. His general mode of life, during my acquaintance, seemed to be pretty uniform. About 12 o'clock I commonly visited him, and frequently found him in bed, or declaiming over his tea, which he drank very plentifully. He generally had a levee of morning visitors, chiefly men of letters: Hawkworth, Goldsmith, Murphy, Langton, Stevens, Beauclerk, and etc., and sometimes leading ladies, learned ladies, particularly I remember a French lady. Later footnote tells us this is probably Madames de Beaufleurs and Mrs. Piozzi. Oh no, just Madame de Beaufleurs, from the source of Mrs. Piozzi. this French lady of wit and fashion doing him the honor of a visit. He seemed to me to be considered as a kind of public oracle, whom everybody thought they had a right to visit and consult, and doubtless they were well rewarded. I never could discover how he found time for his compositions. He declaimed all the morning, then went to dinner at a tavern, where he commonly stayed late, and then drank his tea at some friend's house, over which he loitered a great while, but seldom took supper. I fancy he must have read and wrote chiefly in the night, for I have scarcely recollect that he ever refused going with me to a tavern, and he often went to Ranelagh, which he deemed a place of innocent recreation. He frequently gave all the silver in his pocket to the poor, who watched him between his house and the tavern where he dined. He walked the streets at all hours, and said he was never robbed, for the rogues knew he had little money, nor had the appearance of having much. Though the most accessible and communicative man alive, yet when he suspected that he was invited to be exhibited, he constantly spurned the invitation. 2 young women from Staffordshire visited him when I was present to consult him on the subject of Methodism, to which they were inclined. "Come," said he, "you pretty fools, dine with Maxwell and me at the Mitre, and we will talk over that subject." Which they did, and after dinner he took one of them upon his knee and fondled her for half an hour together. You won't get that kind of stuff from Boswell. Upon a visit to me at a country lodger near Twickenham, he asked what sort of society I had there. I told him, but indifferent, as they chiefly consisted of opulent traders, retired from business. He said he never much liked that class of people, for, "Sir," said he, "they have lost the civility of tradesmen without acquiring the manners of gentlemen." Johnson was much attached to London. He observed that a man stored his mind better there than anywhere else, and that in remote situations a man's body might be feasted, but his mind be starved, and his faculties apt to degenerate from want of exercise and competition. No place, he said, cured a man's vanity of arrogance so well as London. For as no man was either great or good per se, but as compared with others not so good or great, he was sure to find in the metropolis many his equals, and some his superiors. He observed that a man in London was in less danger of falling in love indiscreetly than anywhere else, for there the difficulty of deciding between the conflicting pretensions of a vast variety of objects kept him safe. He told me that he was frequently been offered country preferment if he would consent to take orders, but he could not leave the improved society of the capitals, or consent to exchange the exhilarating joys and splendid decorations of public life for the obscurity, insipidity, and uniformity of remote situations. Speaking of Mr. Hart, Canon of Windsor, and writer of the history of Gustavus Adolphus, he must commended him as a scholar and a man of the most companionable talents he had ever known. He said the defects of his history proceeded not from imbecility, but from foppery. He loved, he said, the old black letter books. They were rich in matter, though their style was inelegant. Wonderfully so, considering how conversant the writers were with the best models of antiquity. Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, he said, was the only book that ever took him out of bed 2 hours sooner than he wished to rise. That was another contender, actually. Anatomy of Melancholy. I was thinking about reading that every day, but decided on this book. This book seemed a little more boring. Although I don't know. Maybe if this play goes on forever, I'll do that one next, because I'll need it. So I guess I'll end there and interruptus of this guy. Who's this guy? Who's talking right now? This is the guest columnist because Boswell didn't talk to Johnson this year. I think this is Reverend Dr. Maxwell. Yes, I think so. We'll continue with Dr. Maxwell. Next sitting, we learned about how Johnson was fondling some Methodist lass when they were drunk in a hall. You don't get that kind of dirty stuff from Boswell. Anyway, better late than Boswell? No, that's not what it is. All's well that's Boswell. That's good. Bye from Boswell.